Okay, here's a question that's gonna start a fight. What is the biggest slasher franchise of all time? Now, before you type Halloween in the comments, hold on, because I looked at the numbers. I mean, really looked at them. Box office, critical scores, cultural impact, consistency across decades. The whole picture. And with Scream 7 hitting theaters on February 27th, directed by Kevin Williamson himself, the man who created the whole thing, this is the perfect time to settle this once and for all. Because here's what nobody talks about. Scream might actually be the most successful slasher franchise ever made. Not in raw numbers, in something much harder to pull off. Consistency. Let's break it down. Alright, so we need to establish the playing field here. When we talk about slasher franchises, there are really four heavyweights that matter. Halloween, Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Scream. Now there are others. Texas Chainsaw, Child's Play, and they all deserve respect. But these four are the Mount Rushmore of slasher cinema. So let's focus on them. Let's start with the cold, hard cash. Halloween has 13 films stretching from 1978 to 2022. And across all of them, the franchise has pulled in approximately $884 million worldwide. That's the highest raw total of any slasher franchise. Period. Michael Myers is the box office king. No argument there. But here's the thing. 13 films, 4 different timelines, 2 remakes, and some of those movies barely made any money at all. Halloween 5, about 11 million. The Curse of Michael Myers, 15 million. Even the Rob Zombie sequel dropped to under 40 million worldwide. Then you've got Friday the 13th, 12 films, a franchise that was basically a factory in the 1980s. They were pumping out a new Jason movie almost every year. Total worldwide box office sits around 468 million, not adjusted for inflation. When you do adjust for inflation, it climbs closer to 900 million, but most of those films were made on tiny budgets and earned modest returns. The biggest hit was actually Freddy vs. Jason, a crossover that technically belongs to both franchises. A Nightmare on Elm Street gave us Freddy Krueger, one of the most iconic villains in movie history. 9 films, around 472 million worldwide, not adjusted. But Freddy burned bright and faded fast. After Dream Warriors in 1987, the franchise went into a slow decline that ended with a widely disliked 2010 remake. And then there's Scream. 6 films, that's it. 6 films across 27 years. And yet the franchise has grossed over $910 million worldwide. Let me say that again. Scream made more money than Halloween, with less than half the number of films. Now I know what you're thinking. But inflation, but ticket prices. And yeah, those are fair points. We'll get to all of that. But let's keep going, because the money is just the beginning of this story. Alright, let's get into the real nerdy stuff, because when you break down the numbers per film, the picture gets really interesting. The average worldwide gross per Scream film is about $151 million. For Halloween, it's about $68 million per film. Friday the 13th, around $39 million per film. And Nightmare on Elm Street comes in at roughly $52 million per film. Scream's average is more than double the next closest franchise. And look at the individual performances. The original Scream in 1996 made $173 million worldwide. That was a record for slasher films at the time. Scream 2 followed up with about $172 million, nearly identical. Even Scream 3, which everyone agrees is the weakest entry, still pulled in $160 million. The only dip came with Scream 4 in 2011, which earned $97 million. And even that number would be a highlight for most of the Halloween or Friday the 13th sequels. Visual, line graph showing the Scream trajectory versus Halloween's wild ups and downs. But here's where it gets really telling. Look at the comeback. After an 11-year gap, Scream came back in 2022 and made $138 million on a $24 million budget. Scream 6 followed in 2023 with $168 million, the highest grossing entry in franchise history at the domestic box office. Compare that to Halloween. After its own 11-year gap, Scream 4 was considered a disappointment. But when Halloween came back in 2018 with the Blumhouse reboot, it exploded to $255 million. Incredible, right? But then Halloween Kills dropped significantly, and Halloween Ends dropped even more. The trilogy went down, not up. Scream did the opposite. Each of its last 3 films made more than the one before it. That's almost unheard of in horror. And the budgets. Every Scream film has been made for between $15 and $35 million. The return on investment is enormous. We're talking 5 to 7 times the production budget on almost every entry. Friday the 13th had some incredible return of investment in the early days. The original was made for about $550,000 and earned almost $60 million. That's legendary. But as the franchise went on, the returns shrank dramatically. Jason X made just $17 million worldwide. Jason Goes to Hell barely broke $15 million. The bottom line, Scream has never had a genuine box office bomb. Not one. Can any other slasher franchise say that? Okay, but box office is only part of the story. Let's talk about something that horror franchises almost never have. Critical respect. But here are the Rotten Tomatoes scores for every Scream film. Scream, 78%. Scream 2, 83%. Scream 3, 41%. Scream 4, 61%. Scream 2022, 76%. Scream 6, 77%. That means 5 out of 6 Scream movies are certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. The only rotten entry is Scream 3, and even that one still has its fans. Now let's look at the competition. Halloween's original 1978 1978 film sits at 96%, absolute classic, no argument. But after that, Halloween 2 is around 55%. Halloween 3, the one without Michael Myers, about 59%. Halloween 4, 5, 6, we're talking 25%, 15%, and 6%. Halloween Resurrection, 12%. Even the well-received 2018 reboot started at 79%, and the trilogy ended with Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends both sitting around 39%. The average Rotten Tomatoes score across all 13 Halloween films is somewhere around 38%. For Scream's 6 films, it's about 69%, almost double. Friday the 13th, this is where it gets rough. Most entries in the franchise sit below 30% on Rotten Tomatoes. The highest rated is the original at about 64%. After that, it's a freefall. Jason X sits at 19%, Jason Goes to Hell at 23%. The franchise average is probably around 25%. A Nightmare on Elm Street has the original masterpiece at 95% and Dream Warriors at a solid 72%. But the rest of the franchise is a roller coaster of diminishing returns, with the 2010 remake bottoming out at 15%. So here's the picture. Scream is not only the highest grossing slasher franchise per film, it's also by far the most critically consistent. And that's not a coincidence. There's a reason for it. See, the other slasher franchises were built around their villains. Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, the killer is the star. And that means the movies can swap out the entire cast, change the story, change the setting, change the tone. As long as the villain shows up, you've got a movie. Scream was different. Scream was built around its characters, Sidney Prescott, Gale Weathers, Dewey Riley. The killer changes in every single film. Different person behind the mask every time. But the heart of the franchise stays the same. That's why the quality held, because you can't just phone it in with a new cast and call it Scream. The writers actually had to create a coherent, evolving story, and for the most part, they did. But let's get beyond the spreadsheets for a second, because there's one more category that matters, and it's the hardest one to measure. Cultural impact. When Scream came out in 1996, the slasher genre was basically dead. Friday the 13th had been dormant since 1993. Nightmare on Elm Street peaked in the late 80s. Halloween hadn't had a relevant entry in years. Horror in general was in a deep creative slump. Scream didn't just make money. It single-handedly revived an entire genre. After Scream, we got I Know What You Did Last Summer, Urban Legend, Valentine, Final Destination. The entire late 90s horror boom exists because Scream proved that teenagers would still show up for slashers if you gave them something smart. And think about the meta commentary. Before Scream, horror movies didn't talk about themselves. Characters didn't reference the rules of horror. Nobody was watching scary movies inside a scary movie. That self-awareness, that wink to the audience, that was Kevin Williamson's genius, and it changed the entire landscape of the genre. The Ghostface mask became a cultural icon overnight. You don't need to have seen a single Scream movie to recognize that mask. It's in the same tier as Michael Myers' white mask or Jason's hockey mask, and Scream achieved that in a fraction of the time. Here's my honest take. If we're talking pure historical importance, Halloween wins. John Carpenter created the template. Michael Myers is the OG. Without Halloween, there is no Friday the 13th. There is no Nightmare on Elm Street. And there is no Scream. That legacy is untouchable. If we're talking sheer volume and cultural penetration in the 1980s, Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street were everywhere. Jason and Freddy were on lunchboxes, t-shirts, video games. They dominated an entire decade of pop culture. But if we're talking about which franchise has made the most money per film, maintained the highest critical quality, and stayed relevant across 3 different decades with the least amount of franchise fatigue, it's Scream. And it's not even close. $910 million across just 6 films. An average of $151 million per entry. 5 out of 6 films certified fresh. 0 box office bombs. 2 successful reboots. And a franchise that still has the power to generate cultural conversation nearly 30 years after it started. Halloween may be the king of slashers. But Scream is the most efficient, most consistent, and most critically respected slasher franchise ever made. And with Scream 7 about to drop, those numbers are only going up. So, is Scream the biggest slasher franchise in history? Drop your thoughts in the comments.